So in the recent video about the banking crisis and how the Trilateral Commission declared that 2023 was going to be the beginning of their new economic order, well, we came across a descriptor for all the chaos going on, and it has been deemed as the Polycrisis of Doom. So I wanted to look into it a little bit more, and I came across a piece by Ian Davis. Now, okay, so I changed a few things and I interject with my own thoughts whenever something comes to mind. So if you want to read the article as he wrote it, you'll just have to check the link in the pinned comment. So with that being said, let's begin. So the premise for this video is basically going to be that every single crisis facing the world today has been orchestrated by the powers that be, and of course they're little minions with the explicit goal of taking over the world. Which does sound a bit hyperbolic, I gotta say, but really, it's not. As we have talked about many times, it's all about this new economic system. The world is apparently descending into chaos with events such as banks collapsing, just, adding on to the problems allegedly caused by the pseudo-pandemic and the war in Ukraine. With all that's going on, it is pretty easy to feel overwhelmed. Now, only a few years ago, it was widely recognized that by nearly every measure, global life outcomes were all improving. And then suddenly, we're all haunted by the specters of conquest, war, famine, and death. Everything from the cost of living, the rising cost of energy, and the food crisis, all the way to the threat of international conflict and world war. But we can't forget, apparently we're also facing a climate disaster and now global financial collapse. Well, that just seems to be the cherry on top. Yes, we seem to be gripped by a global polycrisis, and this polycrisis of doom is entirely man-made. The good news, yes, there is some good news, and that good news is the fact that we can build something better if we have the will. After all, we are many, and lest we forget, we are powerful. And on the other hand, those who seek to exploit the crisis in order to control us, well, they're neither. We just need to understand the problem. That problem is our trust in authority. On a similar note, the war in Ukraine is not causing a complete realignment of the international monetary and financial system. No, it is not causing the regionalization of supply chains, the energy crisis, or giving rise to a multipolar world order. Nope, once again it's the sanctions and the geopolitical policy response to the war that has thrown the planet, and by extension, all of us, deeper into turmoil. There is no doubt that the international chaos is the result of deliberate actions of policymakers. The only question is if the chaos is the intended outcome of their decisions, and all evidence suggests that it is. We should be able to ask what purpose these so-called leaders serve. It does seem that those we mistakenly trust to make decisions for us are either useless or mendacious. As pointed out by John Titus, there is no honesty about the true nature of the real global risks that we face. The so-called World Economic Forum released its farcical named Global Risk Report 2023, in which it lists every single risk it could imagine apart from the banking and financial collapse. Which is pretty funny because, the World Economic Forum is supposed to be an expert on, global economics. Now, the fact that they leave out economic issues, which really do threaten to destabilize the planet, well, it says a lot. Anyway, that risk is also entirely man-made. And naturally, this is all the result of the monetary policies of private central banks, notably the Fed and the Bank of International Settlements. The World Economic Forum, which describes itself as the quote-unquote International Organizations for Public-Private Cooperation, or what I like to call fascism, but I digress. Well, yes, they are among the stalwarts of the establishment that will never disclose the true quote-unquote risks. And that's because this is a multifaceted plan. They rattle on about the polycrisis because they need us to be in a constant state of fear. If they have the masses in this state of fear, then the World Economic Forum believes that they can come in and act as the savior, finally offering up its proposed solution to the chaos. Create the chaos, exploit the chaos, and offer the solution, with the solution always being the intended end goal. Now, perhaps unsurprisingly, the World Economic Forum has concluded that this polycrisis that, they created, well, that just means that traditional methods of government are no longer of any use. Instead, organizations like the UN, the WHO, and the World Bank will handle global governance. It's going to be a global public-private partnership. They even have a nice little acronym for it, the G3P. And so basically what they want to do is just hand over governance duties to banks and other private corporations, which the World Economic Forum tells us will govern these global risks. And no, they won't. Anyway, the good news for the World Economic Forum is that every one of its government's quote-unquote partners agree. This even includes Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping.
Even Vladimir Putin and so on, they all have been young global leaders of the World Economic Forum.
So maybe, just saying maybe, there is something to the fact that Putin was a young global leader for Klaus Schwab. You know, he graduated from the Henry Kissinger and Klaus Schwab program back in 1992. So, yeah, I don't know. They say the world is a stage, and I'm starting to agree. Anyway, you can read their statement on the screen right now. It does seem that the Russian and Chinese governments also believe in this polycrisis. They too assert that international economic cooperation is essential to combat the multifaceted crisis of everything. Yes, the crisis of everything. Okay then. Now, okay, so in 2022, the G20 nations got together to make a declaration. This took place in Bali. So, the 2022 Bali Leaders Declaration extended their commitment to sustainable development and to accelerate Agenda 2030 on a global scale. So, the G20's declaration, just like the World Economic Forum's risk report, conveniently contends that this crisis, this polycrisis, well, they are using it as justification for transitioning the entire world to a system of public-private global governance. In fact, the Russian government played a key role in drawing up the Bali Declaration. There is absolute agreement between East and West in this regard. Now, this is not to suggest that there isn't genuine disagreement between nation-states or between other G3P stakeholders for that matter. However, the conflict arises as they jostle for position within one proposed global governance system. So on that note, we could still be headed for World War. However, it is pretty interesting how they all use war for their advantage and think so cavalier about wanton death and destruction. And what I mean is war, no matter what, ends up playing into their overall agenda. All of this is making me, as I said, it kind of gives new meaning to the old saying the world is a stage. Anyway, the G20's declaration also enthusiastically promotes central bank digital currency. Unlike the entirely fabricated Polycrisis of Doom, CBDCs actually present a real risk to humanity. The solution to the concocted problem is the actual threat. Oh, the irony. They call it an interoperable CBDC, or more commonly known as cross-border payments. This will ensure a single, centrally controlled system of programmable money. And with this, they would be able to determine every aspect of our use of that CBDC. If we adopt it, the global network of international bankers that steers this whole cabal will control every aspect of your life. Now, our best bet appears to be protest. You know, just pressing for reform as best we can. Unfortunately, as we are seeing in France at the moment, public anger at politicians who continue to make policy decisions in the interest of no one but the parasite class, well, I'm not sure if it's working. But what do? Do you protest or not? The only other option available seems to be just electing a bunch of other idiot puppets who will serve the tyrants instead of actually representing us. And that's not going to help anybody. You know, a lot of their deception revolves around manipulation. It's the main reason we see them push this divide and conquer policy so much. They have to keep us distracted and fighting with each other. They can't have people on the left realize that they have the same problems with the people in charge as the people on the right, and vice versa. We all have the same problems, and our problems are the people who are actually running the system. They have to keep a true populist uprising from happening. Hence the identity politics and, all the other bullshit. It's kind of like the cave dwellers watching shadows on the wall. We are transfixed by controlled illusion, leaving us blind to reality. We will never see what is in front of our eyes unless we look in the right direction. So in 1998, the UN Secretary General Kofi Annan delivered the keynote Davos address at the World Economic Forum, describing what he called a quote-unquote quiet revolution. He went on to say that a fundamental shift had occurred as the UN had undergone a complete overhaul. He said, and I quote, "Peace and prosperity cannot be achieved without partnerships involving governments, international organizations, the business community, and civil society. The business of the United Nations involves the businesses of the world." And yeah, that was 1998. They were already moving towards public-private partnerships, corporatism. They have been working at this for a long, long time. Now, in 2005, the World Health Organization published its Connecting for Health strategy document, and in it, they revised expectations about the role of government. They say that the public sector, government, has neither the financial nor the institutional resources to meet the challenges. and a mix of public and private resources is required. This is basically their whole premise for turning towards fascistic thinking. The revised role of governments ceding governance over to the UN and just these, global entities means that they were no longer leading anything. The traditional policymakers were not making policy anymore. Other G3P partners were. These new policymakers are called stakeholders, hence stakeholder capitalism. So as they distract us with chaos, the Polycrisis of Doom, global governance has firmly pivoted towards stakeholder capitalism. And in this model, governments are just the subservient partners to international corporations. Not good. As evidenced by the Bali Declaration, alongside numerous other documents and high-profile political statements, all governments seem to be willing to be relegated to this role. They all, every single one of them, embraces this new model of governance, and that is no matter what ludicrous claptrap we are told about the promise of a multipolar world order. As we talked about, this also includes Russia and China. So, are we being played by everyone? Are they all in on it? The conflicts, the posturing, the war footing, is it all a game? Well, it does seem to be the case. So, faced with this problem, what are we to do? Is this going to be our destiny? Perhaps not. If there is one overriding fear that fills the nightmares of this parasite class, it's the loss of our trust. In fact, the theme at 2022 Davos was restoring trust. Governments are terrified that we no longer trust them. And guess what? We don't. We don't trust them. This is the reason why they are so desperate to censor the internet. Yes, they fear the public's ability to openly share information because if we find out the truth, the corrupt system begins to collapse. This is why any information that questions the state or ruling parasite establishment is labeled as misinformation or disinformation. And so we get some more manipulation. This is why we're starting to see things like freedom of speech being equated to information pollution. How crazy is that? Their corruption is why they seek to shut down the free and open exchange of ideas. They cannot afford to have the masses realize what is really happening. And slowly but surely, we are. The fact is that nothing could be less democratic than that, but these dangerous toadies are perfectly willing to defy all democratic ideals, while having the audacity to claim that they are the ones defending democracy. The crazy part to me is how many people fall for that. It's crazy. It's a sick joke. These crazy people seriously want us to believe that we should allow our representative governments to define the truth. They will decree what information is false and what isn't. What could go wrong with that? All of this bullshit about disinformation is in itself disinformation. Democracy has nothing to do with our trust in democratic institutions. But on the other hand, democracy has everything to do with our control in the decision-making process. Alleged representative democracy has always been based on the idea that we hand that control over to those who lead these institutions. And therefore, representative democracy is the antithesis to democracy. We are being farmed by a parasitic bunch of robber barons and grifters whose whole empire is built on one underlying premise. We trust their authority. Without that trust, the foundation for their entire corrupt system begins to falter. Perhaps it is fairer to say that most of us trust our representatives' alleged authority. However, if we continue to believe this illusion that we can actually elect new leaders, we are going to remain lost. Because in reality, we can't. The parasitic establishment of stakeholders, the World Economic Forum, these global oligarchies, they are the ones defining policy now. And the crazy part is, the parasite establishment of stakeholders, the G3P, that actually defines policy isn't elected by anyone. I mean, the whole point of CBDCs, digital ID, biosecurity, and the censorship campaigns is to entrap us in a system that has tangible power. Should the G3P succeed, then our quote-unquote trust will matter less. If we don't stand up for ourselves right now, well then we will face very, very real limitations. That is, once their global surveillance state is installed, and it's not that far away. We are not at that point yet, and really there is no reason why we should ever be. In order to avoid this enslavement, the change we need to make is first and foremost psychological. Yes, we have to wake up and realize that nothing any government ever does is for our benefit. We have no reason at all to trust anything governments say, and we have to stop believing their propaganda. We have to realize that their power only exists because we imagine that it does. The moment we realize, en masse, that its claimed authority is a charade, that alleged quote-unquote power evaporates in an instant. The fact is that the global powers that be are frantically exploiting this fabled polycrisis in a desperate effort to lock us up before we realize that it's all a scam. And as we have talked about, despite apparent animosities, all governments seem to agree upon one single model of global governance. Now, some believe that we should forget about the Polycrisis because it's being used as a propaganda device. And while I do agree that it is being used as a form of propaganda, we can't really ignore it because the ramifications from the man-made disasters are going to affect every one of our lives in one way or another. The thing is that millions of us protested against the Iraq War. Millions more later protested against the imposition of lockdown restrictions. These protests did not really make that much of a difference because the parasite class, the establishment, well, they don't get killed in wars and they don't endure poverty. No, they do not suffer in the same manner that we do in regards to the ramifications of their own policies. There's a two-tiered system already in place. They have insulated themselves from crisis and used those disasters to gain more control over the population every single time. So, alright, now you're gonna have to hear me out on this one. Of course, we should all use peaceful means at our disposal to maintain whatever pressure we can. However, at this point, it is hopelessly unrealistic to expect that political process or protest to deliver any real change. Now, the reason I say that is because I have a pair of eyes and I actually pay attention to politics. The thing is that whenever protests become violent, all it achieves is to give the state an opportunity to claim legitimacy for its crackdown. Yes, they use these things to crack down on the population, and they could use it to install martial law. It's kind of like a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. You protest and you get infiltrated by instigators who get the crowd into a frenzy, and then the establishment uses that to crack down. And if you don't protest, well then shit, you sit idly by while the powers that be steamroll you. As I said, it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation.
One of the reasons I'm very disappointed is I've had a sort of realization over recent weeks that it really doesn't matter what we do. If we do the things that those operating this global fraud expect, we will lose. They already know we'll do these things. They've mapped it out and they've worked out what are the things that are most likely to happen. It'll be, well, there'll be some noisy individuals. Well, as long as we can control the amount of the share of voice they get, then we don't need to be worried about them. And I'm worried that I've done absolutely nothing that differs from what they have already modelled and wargamed, and that did not work, or they wouldn't have moved off with this plan. So unfortunately the conclusion I've got is collectively we need to do something unexpected, and if we do expected things, we will lose.
So he says they wargame everything, every possible scenario. So as I said, it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't type of situation. And if those are the only two options, well then I suggest we all go with damned if you do. Because if we don't protest and stand up for ourselves, then we have no shot. However, here's the kicker. We have no choice. We have to come together and stop this political tribalism. I know, it's a long shot. But we don't need to engage in a bloody revolution to build a better future. We just need to realize the true nature of our immense power. This is why I hold out hope for the masses, the left and the right alike, that they will eventually snap out of their manufactured illusions, that they will snap out of their hypnotic trance, and finally realize that they have to come together, all sides of the political spectrum, to root out corruption, and to ensure that our representatives actually represent us. Is that too much to ask? I don't think so. Because if we come together, that's our true immense power. As we have talked about, this is the reason why identity politics is all the rage. It's a perfect tool for division. If we set aside the games and realize that our issues are with the establishment and not with each other, well then we can get real change. But somehow, at the moment, they have a lot of useful idiots running around as enforcers for the regime, dogmatically adhering to their tribe, no matter what. We are not going to get anywhere with that mentality. In order for us to realize our true political power, well, we will have to finally accept that obedience is not a virtue. And I know, obedience to authority is not some new problem that we face. But the scale of ambition and the technological capability of the parasite establishment class is. That right there is a new problem. Anyway, approximately 500 years ago, Etienne de la Boetie explored the politics of obedience, and he wrote that obedience is truly a monstrous vice. It allows us to indulge in the luxury of convenience and to renege easily on our duty to take responsibility for our own lives and actions. However, this individual had a solution. Yes, Etienne de la Boetie's solution was as true then as it is now. Resolve to serve no more, and you are at once freed. Once again, this is HelioWave. If you like the content, like, comment, and subscribe. Share the video if you want to. If you're in a position to, consider subscribing on Locals or Subscribestar. As always, make sure you disobey those true fascistas, and yes, I do hope you have a good night.